Hey there, in this video we're going to be reviewing the XP Pen Artist 15.6. This is a display drawing tablet, sort of like a Wacom Cintiq or Mobile Studio Pro, that sort of thing. And we're going to review it in this video, so check it out. Alright, welcome everyone. My name is K. Michael Russell. I am a comic book colorist, and welcome to my YouTube channel. And like I said in the intro, the video today we're going to be doing an unboxing and review of this display tablet, which XP Pen was kind enough to send me. It's the first time that's happened, I believe. So yeah, I've made it. So anyway, it's a big box. I'm used to carrying my iPad Pro around, so this feels big to begin with. But I'll be comparing it, trying it with Photoshop. But we're kind of comparing it to the Wacom products because it's more in line with that. But I'll just give you my impressions about how it works too. So let's get this thing open. And actually, before we open it, I thought I'd do a quick run through on the technical specs here. I don't know if you guys can see this, probably not on the camera. So it's a 15.6 inch display. It's a full HD, so it's 1920 by 1080. 8192 levels of pressure sensitivity, so that's really high. I think that's as high as the Wacom stuff. 6 shortcut keys, which I don't really use that much, but we'll test them out. And newest technology for making the lines flow smoother and perform better, according to the box here. And you get a stand and some other things. So yeah, we'll look at all this stuff. One thing I did notice right off the top was the display gamut. So basically what this means, display gamut is how much of the Adobe RGB color spectrum the display can show. And to give you a comparison point here, the Wacom Cintiq 16-inch, the Cintiq Pro, has 85% of the Adobe RGB coverage, and this one's 75. So the color reproduction is not going to be quite as high, but we'll see what that looks like in person because I don't really know. I don't know what that means to the real world. So we'll figure that out. All right, so inside the main box is a big white box. Sorry, I have no space here. So here's what it looks like in the box. Let's get it out of here so I can get this big box out of the way. Okay, so boring stuff first. Let's look at the little accessory box, see what's in here. And this is an actual unboxing. I have not looked at this. I'm going to be editing out a lot of noise in this video. Okay, so I've arranged everything on the little styrofoam thing so you guys can see. It's all this black stuff on black background. It didn't work. So anyway, start off with plugs. This is the plug that I'll be using. Good old American style plug. And there's other types here. I don't know which countries these belong to, but they won't work here. And there is a cable that seems to be HDMI on one side and dual USB and a USB-C. So this goes to the power adapter according to the sticker. I don't know about the other one. I plan on hooking this to my MacBook because they did say that I'd have to remove the Wacom drivers from my desktop, and I'm not interested in doing that because yeah, those drivers, I need them. There's also, it looks like, was that a mini display port, I think, to HDMI, maybe, we'll see. One of those fancy 2-finger gloves, which I've never really used, but if you want to feel like a real digital artist, flash this around, impress some people, maybe not. Paperwork. There is a USB extension, that's all that is. And then the pen, and there's a little stand. The stand's very heavy for its size. Oh, you also get a little cloth thing. The pen feels remarkably like the pen from the last Wacom Mobile Studio Pro that I had. Very similar to that, similar weight. 2 buttons on the pen on the stylus, and I don't know. We'll see how that feels like on the screen. Okay, let's get all this stuff out of the way. Okay, so this is the tablet. It's lighter than I expected it to be. It's got this cover on it, so let's get this off. This little sticker says, "Please peel off this mask." It has some rubberized stuff on the back to kind of keep it from sliding around, which is nice. On this side, there's a USB-C connector, couple of rocker buttons here, sort of volume possibly, and a power button on that side. And on the other side, there are no connectors, but we have quick button things there, and that's it. They were also kind enough to include a stand, but I don't know if I'll put it on that yet so you guys can still see. Okay, so I've come across my first snag, which I guess not everybody would deal with, but in the box, so in the box there are, this is the main cable it looks like, and there is a USB to power, so this will need to be plugged into the wall. And then on the other end, there is a USB-C, a USB, and an HDMI. And my MacBook only has USB-C. So I don't see a way to connect this to my MacBook right now. Yeah, and there's only one port. I just checked. There's only one USB-C port on this. So I'm going to email my contact at XPPen and see what we find out. Alright, so it has been about a week, I think, since where I left you guys, and here's what happened. So I made contact with my representative there at XPPen, and I need an adapter. So I ordered the adapter. I'll put a picture somewhere so you guys can see, but basically it requires an HDMI and a regular USB and a USB-C, and I only have USB-C on my MacBook. This is a first world problem, I realize that, but yes, my MacBook only has USB-C ports. So I had to buy the adapter. Again, I'll show you guys what that looks like. So I've got a lot of cables now running all over the place. And honestly, installation went pretty well. So at first, it only worked as a display, and it wasn't picking up the pin, but I didn't restart. So I should have restarted, turn it off and on again. And after that, it started working. And I did a little dabbling with it, and I'll show some of that video now, I assume. And just the first initial notes is that, keep in mind I'm coming from an iPad Pro, which has next to zero parallax as far as like the distance between the stylus and where you're drawing. And this one has a few millimeters there, which didn't take too long to get used to. I did run the calibration software, and that seemed to work. Okay. And that's really all I've done so far. So I thought that instead of just goofing around with it, I would actually color something and just time lapse through that and give you guys my thoughts while that runs. And I would do this in real time, but it's connected to my MacBook, and I'm awful with the Mac keyboard shortcuts, like even zooming in and out. Like I forget if it's Command or Alt or whatever. So I don't want you guys to see me struggle through that. So I'm just gonna color this little bust here by Max Dunbar, friend and excellent artist. So I'm gonna color this real quick and just kind of see what it feels like, and that way I can give you guys a pretty decent impression of whether I think that it's worth it or not. So let's go. You guys can probably see me keep looking over at the keyboard to see what I should be pressing. That's how used to working on a Mac I am. So while I'm flatting this, since this requires very little brain power, I might be able to work and talk at the same time. One thing I wanted to point out is, and again, coming from an iPad with a Retina display, with a very high resolution, very high, what's the term, pixel density, as far as like the number of pixels per inch or per centimeter or whatever the number is. there's definitely this is only a 1080p screen. Okay, so it's full HD 1980 by 1080 or 1920 by 1080, and I am used to working on a much denser display. I don't know what it is on the iPad versus this. I will try to do that calculation and put it in the video when I'm editing. There's definitely an obvious difference between the picture quality, and I can see this in the text more than anything else. This just seems to be the place where it's most obvious. But for the price, right now, I'm actually impressed with this thing. Because honestly, you can't expect a, I think a $400-ish device to, have the same specs and quality that a $2,000 Cintiq does or whatever. But first impressions are this would absolutely work well for beginners. The other thing that I noticed, and I'll try to overlay some pictures of this too, is I could see the difference in the visible gamut, like the visible colors that this can duplicate. I've noticed it with some pages more than others, and I'll show you guys what I did on, I put it side by side with my MacBook. MacBooks have pretty good color representation. I don't know what the numbers are. I'll try to figure that out too. But the on this device, Spider-Man was like the red was coming out more saturated than it did on my MacBook or my desktop. I actually kind of looked at both, and I think I've got pictures of both. I don't know how big of a deal that is, honestly. You're definitely going to be, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, I think if you put this just on its own, I don't think you would notice. And especially unless you've got it like side by side next to something else, which I do, it's not bad. It's 75% of the RGB gamut, which is, I mean, it's not stellar, but it's not terrible either. And I noticed on some of the hack slash pages that I put it up against, I really couldn't tell much difference at all. So I think it depends on the colors. Like I'm wondering if red is an issue, like certain types of red or things that are very close to pure red, if it just doesn't do well with that, which wouldn't shock me. Red's weird in a lot of ways, it seems like. So keep that in mind. But again, I don't know how big of a deal that is. If, you might see a little bit more banding than some other monitors, but I tried a few big gradients with it and didn't really notice anything dramatically different. While I was editing this, I noticed that the stand seems to be moving quite a bit more than I could actually tell while I was working on it. So I think part of the reason why it looks so dramatic here is that it's sped up, but while I was actually working on it, I didn't even notice that it was really moving. It's also sitting on a kind of a cushy mouse pad as well, so that might be part of that also. So flatting with the lasso is, honestly, that's probably about as, what's the word, like precise as I ever need to get. When you're brushing, that's one thing, and so far so good. I'm having to stop myself from doing gestures on the screen because, again, I'm way too used to Procreate right now. But so far so good, and let's just keep coloring. Alright, so I've spent about 30 minutes, 45 minutes with this thing over the last little bit working on that piece, and I'm really impressed. I'm a little shocked, honestly. It's, I'll get to the pros and cons at the end for sure. There are a few of both, but for the price, I said 400 earlier, I thought it was, and I was looking at this before. This is actually $359.99, 360 bucks US on Amazon right now, and I think that's the regular price. You could buy 4 of these for the price of a Wacom Cintiq Pro 16. I think that would probably be the equivalent. They're both about the same size. Yeah, like I said, I honestly didn't have high hopes. And to clarify something here, just to be very clear, this was not a sponsored video. They didn't pay me to do the video. They didn't give me any, oh, you have to say this, you have to say that, none of that. Just my honest opinion. They did ask me to link to their store in the description, which I will do, because I'm impressed with the tablet. And I guess I expected, especially coming from an iPad Pro, Wacom Mobile Studio Pro in the past, I kind of expected to be let down by this, like a lot. I expected to find a lot of problems. I really did. And I'm not really seeing them. I mean, I'll go down so pros and cons here real quick. Pros, it's inexpensive. It doesn't feel cheap though, as far as the build quality. It's very solid. It's extremely comfortable. Like, it's got this sort of soft touch plastic all the way around. The bezels feel big to me relative to the iPad, but anything would be big compared to the iPad. I would say this is a great tablet for beginners, because if you want to draw on your screen, and it really does make a big difference, I think I would recommend this to someone just starting out, because at no point did I feel like I was doing lesser work or something, because of the hardware. The color gamut, which I was worried about. So what this means, I found this little graphic here describing it, and so this triangle, the large one that you can probably barely see this line right here, but this triangle going up to here, this triangle, all the colors in between here are what's in the Adobe RGB color gamut, which is sort of one of the standards used for testing monitors. This within this is sRGB. That's the smaller gamut there. So there's a few less colors in that, and this monitor covers 75% of that. Okay. While I was editing, I realized that I actually misspoke there. This monitor covers 75% of the big triangle there, the Adobe RGB spectrum. Back to the video. Although, if you're looking at like a rainbow colored image with like a ton of different colors in it, you might notice some small differences between the two, like the Spider-Man pictures I showed earlier, where some of the colors looked a little bit more or less saturated. But I don't know if it's a big enough problem for me to say, don't buy it because of that. Because as I showed in the pictures earlier, and I'll pull them up while I'm talking about this now, there's just the eyeball test. It's not a big difference. It's really not. So yeah, 3 pros, like I said, the price. I mean, you can't beat the price. Good beginner tablet, just for the same reason, for the price and just the quality of it. And like I said, the color gamut was better than expected to me, and as far as like a real world scenario. Now for the cons, and there are a few. For me, it's the resolution is one. It's, like I said, it's 1080p on a 15-inch screen. When you're that close to it, especially where text and parts of Photoshop where you're having to read things, you can see pixels pretty clearly. Again, I think part of the reason that I notice it so much is I'm kind of a junkie for sharpness and image quality. You can ask my wife. I always want to watch the 4K version of the movie or whatever. Those things really stand out to me, and I only really noticed it in the menus of Photoshop. It's subtle, and if you're not used to it, you would probably not even think it's an issue. But again, I'm coming from really dense, high pixel density screens So it seemed really obvious to me. You might try it and realize that it's not that big of a deal. And I didn't really notice it on the canvas itself at all. The second thing is the parallax I talked about earlier, which is the distance between the pen and the screen. It seems like a lot relative to, again, what I'm coming from. But once I got going with it, I really didn't notice it. I did calibrate it at one point with the software that's built in, and it seemed to work fine. It seemed to work better after I calibrated it, just because I calibrated it from my eye, not just put the pen right on the X and make sure it's there, but make sure it's there from your eye position, because it could be different if I'm trying to put the cursor on this spot. Well, if I'm standing here and do it, and then I do it over here, the angle is different, if that makes sense. So make sure you're calibrating it, that you're not like shifting your head around while you're doing it. Calibrating helped with the parallax. And then the other thing, which is, again, I'm just not used to, there is some kind of protective film over it that I'm not used to working with. And they recommend not removing it. There's actually two films when you open this thing up. You tear off the first one that just protects it in shipping, and then there's one that's like super stuck to it. It's not designed to be taken off. That's at least my understanding for what I'm reading. I don't know if that's affecting the screen quality or not, because I haven't pulled it off, but just something else to keep in mind. So the screen felt a little like grabby on my hand, so that's why I used the glove that they included, because I felt like I could move easier with it. One thing that I noticed on their website, which is a little deceiving, it says, I don't think it was intended, it might just be a translation issue, but on the website it says it supports 4K. Now this is not a 4K display. It will not show a 4K picture. What it will do, from my understanding, is you can connect it to a computer with a 4K display, and it still works okay. I guess at some point there was a driver issue with that. So when it says supports 4K, keep that in mind. It is not a 4K monitor. Okay, this is a 1080p monitor, which means it's a quarter of the pixels that are in 4K. The stylus is very comfortable. It feels a lot like the Wacom stylus that comes with the Cintiqs. There's no battery, nothing to worry about there. I have no complaints about that. The only thing about the pen that it took me a while to figure out was there's two buttons on it, and one of them will like toggle between pen and eraser. And there was a couple of times where I accidentally bumped the eraser button, I guess, and it took me forever to figure out what I was doing, because I knew it was something in the software, because it was working in other apps. But so anyway, keep that in mind. You might want to disable that if you accidentally end up bumping that. So I guess the last question is, should you buy it? If you are just starting out and budget is a big thing, which it usually is when you're just starting out, yes, absolutely. I think it's a great tablet for the price, especially compared to your iPad Pros and your Wacom Mobile Studio Pros and Cintiqs and all of those. It's a massive price difference. So for less than $400, this gets you a long, long way, and I would absolutely recommend it for that. The only reason that I wouldn't recommend it to quote unquote professionals or whatever is if you're used to a higher resolution display, it's going to be obvious that this is a 1080p display. Okay. The other thing is if you work on, like high resolution, print, photo editing, whatever for, magazines, and that's your job, maybe that color gamut comes into effect a little bit. I really didn't see much of it. Like I said, the eyeball test really, it didn't make much of a difference from what I could see. And I know my monitors calibrated that I was comparing it to. So they were very close enough that I really couldn't see that much of a difference at all. Although I'm sure there was. There would have to be, but not something that was obvious. So check it out. The link's in the description if you're interested. And just to clarify, I don't remember if I mentioned this earlier. It's been a week since that last video, but this tablet was given to me to review. I don't have to return it, but I wasn't paid for the review. I wasn't told what to say, you know, any of that kind of stuff. They wanted an honest review. This is not a sponsored video. I'm not getting paid for it. If you buy based on the link in the description, I don't get a dime. Okay, so I actually, whether you purchase it or not, doesn't have any bearing on me financially. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoy the video, and maybe I'll do more of these if people keep sending me stuff. Who knows? But I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.